Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. The noise in my uncle's house was a constant buzz. Laughter, clinking plates, and the steady hum of chatter about this year's potluck. My Aunt Deborah had already made her rounds, greeting everyone with that careful smile she used when checking off boxes. "Olivia, how are you, dear?" she asked as she handed me a plate of macaroni salad. I smiled back, polite but distant. "Good, thanks." She nodded like she already knew that answer, then launched into the usual small talk. "Still working as a consultant, I assume? I know it's tough to get into that field without a firm, but..." I bit back a sigh, not wanting to explain again that I wasn't struggling. "It's going well," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's a small firm, but we're doing fine." She gave me that look, the one that said, "That's nice, dear, but it doesn't sound like success to me." It was always like this. Family get-togethers were less about connection and more about judging. My cousins and aunts prattled on about new cars, big promotions, vacations to exotic places. Everyone was settling down in some way, except for me. No husband, no kids, no house. Just a modest apartment and a thriving marketing firm that no one knew about. I wasn't going to tell them about the millions I'd made in the past few years or the programs I funded quietly on the side. That was for me, not for their judgment. The evening dragged on, and as usual, I ended up on the periphery, listening to everyone else talk about their successes while I stood there, an invisible bystander. My Aunt Deborah was regaling the group with how proud she was of her son's promotion, her niece's new house, and her brother's success in real estate. The usual parade of accomplishments, and I just had to sit there and nod. But when her eyes finally turned my way, I braced myself. Her voice shifted, just enough to make me feel it. "And Olivia?" she said, her tone dripping with that special kind of pity. "Olivia's doing her thing. Marketing, I think?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the words press down on me. "Sweetheart, maybe you should consider something more stable," she continued, her voice like syrup. "Maybe find some direction. I hear volunteering at a shelter can really give you a sense of purpose." My jaw clenched. I forced a smile. "I'm doing fine," I said, quieter than I intended. Before I could say anything else, Aunt Deborah launched into another speech about the importance of real careers and making a difference. I nodded along, each word feeling more like a poke at my ribs than genuine advice. My cousin Emily, always the well-meaning but condescending one, leaned over with a bright smile. "You know, Liv, you could probably do better. Have you thought about a real job? Like a stable one with benefits?" I bit the inside of my cheek, fighting the urge to snap. Emily was convinced that working for some corporation, punching in a 9-to-5 clock, was the only way to go. "Oh, and there's a career transition program at the community center. It could help you figure things out," she added, like she was giving me a map to find my way out of the wilderness. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Instead, I let her talk, letting the words wash over me like white noise. As the conversation moved on, I excused myself and found a quiet corner by the TV, trying to melt into the background. But then something caught my attention. The news anchor's voice broke through the buzz. "A local philanthropist has donated $30 million to a community center for a new tech education program." I turned, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. They showed a clip of my firm, helping set up the program, and there, in a brief frame, was my face. My stomach dropped. The room fell silent. All I could hear was the soft hum of the television as my family gawked at the screen. My aunt was the first to react, her mouth open in disbelief. "Olivia, is that you?" I couldn't answer. My heart raced. The shock in their eyes was almost unbearable. $30 million? Emily gasped. "Where did that come from?" Before I could speak, Aunt Deborah's voice sliced through the tension. "You've been hiding this from us? Why didn't you tell us, Olivia? Why keep something like this a secret?" I looked around at their stunned faces and felt the familiar sting of resentment. "I didn't want the attention," I said, my voice colder than I meant. "I didn't want your judgment or unsolicited advice. It wasn't about praise, it was about making a difference." Their gazes shifted, some with embarrassment, others with confusion. "You should have shared this," Aunt Deborah muttered, though I could tell her mind was more on the social implications than my work. "Maybe you would have judged me for it," I shot back, and the words hung in the air, thick with meaning. I wasn't angry, I was just tired. "I've been giving back in ways you'll never know," I said quietly, "because it's never been about making you proud." It's been about making an impact. The conversation around me sputtered and died as my family absorbed the reality of what I'd been doing all these years. But for me, the moment felt more like a tidal wave crashing over an already exhausted shoreline. The truth was out, but it wasn't something I'd ever expected to share. I'd always kept it hidden, not out of shame, but because I knew exactly how they would respond. I had spent years building my business, years that none of them had ever noticed or cared to ask about. My firm was small, but it was worth millions. High-end clients in tech and finance, marketing strategies that made companies thrive. But that was a side of me my family couldn't see. They only cared about what they could measure in a tangible way: marriage, kids, promotions, houses. They didn't understand what it was like to wake up each morning with a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to someone else's expectations. I'd been running my firm for 6 years, working my ass off to keep it growing. But even now, I lived in a modest apartment that barely raised an eyebrow. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I never had. I dressed like I was broke, ate like I was broke, kept my life frugal to avoid the inevitable questions. And the questions always came. How do you live on your own? Don't you think it's time to settle down? What's the plan? There wasn't a plan. I wasn't going to buy a house just to impress anyone. I wasn't going to get married because they told me I should. My success was mine, and I'd kept it that way. But no matter how many donations I made, no matter how much I helped out behind the scenes, it was never enough for them to see past their narrow ideas of success. The community projects, the ones that really mattered to me, those were the things that should have meant something. I funded a program for underserved youth in my city, helping kids get into tech. I set up a grant for women trying to break into the tech industry, a field that had been especially difficult for them to navigate. But all of that went unnoticed. None of it ever came up in family conversations, and I made damn sure it didn't. I didn't want their pity or their praise, and I sure as hell didn't want to be their project to fix. That night, when Aunt Deborah had made her speech and mentioned the word stable, it was like a knife in my chest. Stable. They never asked about the work I was doing. They only wanted to know if I was fitting into their mold. Married, successful in the way they understood success. My accomplishments were invisible to them. My wealth, the kind I'd earned quietly and without fanfare, was a burden I didn't want them to see. Now, I had to face it all. It was there in front of them, laid bare on the TV screen like a truth they couldn't ignore. But they still didn't get it. They couldn't. I've been doing this for years, I said again, my voice low but firm. I built something from nothing. But it wasn't about making you proud or any of that. It was about making a difference, quietly. Aunt Deborah's face had gone from disbelief to concern. But why didn't you tell us? You could have shared this with the family. We would have celebrated with you. I shook my head, the anger I'd kept buried for years starting to bubble to the surface. I didn't want to be celebrated. I didn't need your celebration. This wasn't about you. It was about the work I'm doing. And I didn't want to be measured by your standards. There was a long silence. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, heavy with questions they didn't want to ask but couldn't avoid anymore. Olivia, Emily ventured, hesitant now. We had no idea. I just didn't know. I thought you were still figuring things out. You know, like, in between jobs. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. In between jobs? I've been running a successful business, Emily, and it's been thriving. I've been doing fine without your advice. Emily flushed, her cheeks tinged with embarrassment, but the apology she offered didn't reach me. She had no idea how deep this ran. No clue what it was like to sit through years of their condescending pity, to have them look at you like you're a failure because you don't fit into their version of success. You could have just told us, Liv, Aunt Deborah added, though her words didn't sound like understanding, just a desperate attempt to save face. We could have all supported you. Support me? I asked, my voice cold now. You didn't even bother to ask what I was doing, Deborah. You just assumed I wasn't settling down in the way you wanted me to. You think that's support? She looked down, unable to answer. The guilt was there, but it was thin, like a cheap cover-up. I felt the bitterness rise in my throat. You've never seen me for what I am. You've only seen what you want me to be. I wanted to walk out of there right then, but I didn't. Instead, I held my ground, letting the weight of their ignorance sink in. For the first time, I was saying what I'd kept quiet for so long. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. The silence hung in the air after my outburst, everyone still processing the news. It felt like everyone was tiptoeing around me, unsure of what to say next. I didn't want to be the center of attention anymore, but that wasn't going to happen. Not with Aunt Deborah gearing up for her annual toast, She stood at the head of the room, clearing her throat with a practiced air of authority. All right, everyone, gather around. It's time for my little speech. I knew what was coming. Every year, the same thing. She'd start by listing off the accomplishments of everyone else, making sure to highlight the real successes, promotions, big houses, fancy vacations, the things she considered milestones. This year's been full of good news, Deborah began, her voice carrying a mix of pride and expectation. As most of you know, my son Greg was promoted to senior partner at the law firm. We're all so proud of him. He's worked hard and truly earned it. And then there's my niece, Rachel, who just bought her first house. A beautiful home, too. I could feel the weight of her gaze slide over me. Though she hadn't quite reached me yet, I was already bracing for the impact. And of course, my brother Mark has expanded his real estate business. He's built quite the portfolio this year. Lots of impressive properties, good investments. I knew the script, the build-up, and now the shift. Deborah cleared her throat again, a little too dramatically this time, before her eyes landed on me. And then there's Olivia, she said, her voice losing its lightness for just a fraction of a second. Olivia's doing her thing. In marketing, right? She didn't even wait for a response, just continued as if my work was a passing thought, a mere footnote. She's got a job. It's not the same as, say, a career with a company, but it's something. Still, I'm sure she could use a little more direction in life. Her words cut through me like a knife. A little more direction, she said, like I was some lost child who needed to be shown the way. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. My frustration was boiling over, but I kept it in check because no one ever listened when you tried to argue with Aunt Deborah. There's nothing wrong with being a little more settled, Olivia, she added, her eyes scanning me with that all-knowing look of hers. Maybe it's time to find something more stable, something with more structure. You could do some volunteer work, help at a shelter maybe, give back to society. That's always good for someone like you. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I had been giving back, that I had been quietly changing lives, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She wasn't listening. She wasn't hearing me. Instead, I forced a smile, one that probably looked more pain than anything else. I do what I can, I said, my voice flat, in my own way. Deborah didn't seem to register the bitterness in my tone. She nodded as if everything had been settled. Of course, dear, she said. I just want to make sure you're not missing out on a real chance to give back to the community. It's important to stay grounded. Grounded. That word stung. It was like she was implying I was out of touch, living in some fantasy world where my work didn't matter. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it from her, but it was the first time I'd let it cut so deep. I clenched my fists under the table, holding on to my composure with everything I had. The problem wasn't just that Deborah didn't understand what I was doing. It was that she never cared enough to try. My cousins were all nodding, their faces polite, maybe even sympathetic. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't see the countless hours I'd poured into my business or the way I'd built something from the ground up without anyone's help. They didn't know how hard it had been to stay invisible, to keep my success quiet, because I didn't want to deal with the disappointment they would feel if I didn't follow their script. Maybe you should think about it, dear, Deborah added, as though we were having some kind of conversation about what I should do next. A little structure never hurt anyone. I wanted to roll my eyes, but I just sat there, gritting my teeth. I'm fine, really, I said, forcing the words out. Thanks for the suggestion, though. Of course, she said, smiling sweetly, as though she'd just solved all my problems with one casual remark. Just trying to help, Olivia. It was that same smile, the one that always made me feel like I was a project, a puzzle to be solved. I wanted to tell her that I didn't need her help, that I didn't need anyone's pity, but the words didn't come. Instead, I nodded, keeping my feelings locked inside. The rest of the room buzzed with polite conversation, the awkwardness lingering between us like a heavy cloud. My frustration didn't dissipate. It just settled into the pit of my stomach. I wasn't going to correct her. I wasn't going to explain myself. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, especially not to someone who thought they knew what was best for me. I had barely managed to tune out Aunt Deborah when Emily sidled up beside me, her eyes wide with what I could only describe as concern, the kind of concern that made you feel like you were being gently patted on the head, but not in a good way. Olivia, she said, voice dripping with that patronizing sweetness she always had, you know, if you ever wanted to make things a little easier on yourself, I think there are some great opportunities out there for you. I raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. I already knew where this was going, and I wasn't in the mood to play along. I've been thinking about it, she continued, leaning in as though sharing a deep, life-changing secret. You've got all this potential, right? You've been working on your own, but maybe you could really do better in a more structured environment, with benefits and like a real paycheck. A real paycheck? I almost laughed. If only she knew how much I made, how much I'd quietly amassed running my own firm. But I didn't correct her. There was no point. Maybe something like a marketing coordinator or an assistant role, Emily added, nodding as though she were doing me a favor by suggesting these lower-level positions she assumed would suit me. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste metal, trying to hold back the frustration that was bubbling up. It was honestly a little amusing, though. She had no idea that I was already doing far more than she could even imagine. But I wasn't about to explain it to her. I didn't owe her that. Oh, and there's this great career transition program at the community center, she said, her voice almost hopeful. It's designed for people who, need to figure things out. It could really help you get back on track. They have tons of resources. I think you'd really benefit from it. A career transition program for a real job. I couldn't help but feel a smirk pull at the corner of my mouth. As if some career center was going to give me the keys to success I'd already unlocked on my own. Thanks, Emily, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I appreciate the suggestion. Really? She smiled like I'd just received some great advice and patted me on the shoulder, oblivious to how tired I was of this conversation. I could see her already moving on to the next person in the room, probably eager to tell them how helpful she had been. I stood there for a moment, listening to the other conversations float by, feeling that familiar sense of alienation creeping back in. This wasn't the first time Emily had tried to fix me, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. It wasn't even the first time she'd offered me a job, assuming that I was just stuck in some rut. And I hated that I always had to smile and nod, pretending I appreciated her concern when it was just thinly veiled condescension. The chatter around me felt louder now, almost suffocating. People were talking about their kids, their plans for the summer, the latest TV shows. I felt like a ghost in my own family's house. A stranger, someone who wasn't really part of their world because I didn't fit into their little boxes. I turned away from the group, feeling that deep, gnawing sense of isolation hit me again. My gaze landed on the hallway leading into the quieter part of the house. Without saying another word, I made my escape, slipping into the solitude of a corner by the window. I leaned against the wall and stared out into the dark, letting the cold of the night air cool my frustration. The family's laughter and chatter faded into background noise as I allowed myself a moment of peace. I wasn't like them. I didn't need to be, but damn, sometimes it would have been nice if they saw me for who I was, rather than who they thought I should be. The conversation in the next room continued on, a dull hum of voices in the background as I tried to steady myself in the quiet corner. I breathed in the cool air, letting my thoughts wander. I was still pissed off at Emily and her helpful suggestions. I didn't want her help, didn't need it, but I had to smile and nod like I appreciated it. The sounds of the gathering felt distant now, like I was underwater. My eyes drifted toward the TV, which was still on in the corner of the room, playing some news segment. I didn't really think much of it at first, but then I heard the words community center, and that caught my attention. I straightened, the chill in my spine matching the cold air outside. The news anchor's voice was suddenly sharp and clear. A local philanthropist has made an incredible contribution to the community center. An anonymous donation of $30 million will fund a new tech education program aimed at helping underserved youth prepare for careers in the digital economy. I froze. My blood turned to ice. The anchor continued, but I couldn't hear the words. All I could focus on was the brief clip that flashed across the screen. It was a shot of my face, a clip from an interview I'd given months ago for a project I'd funded. For the first time in years, my name was out there in the world, tied to something real, something big. This generous gift from Olivia Harrison, the founder of a successful marketing firm, has the potential to change the lives of countless young people in the city. Olivia Harrison. I was staring at myself on the screen, my chest tight as the weight of it hit me like a ton of bricks. The hush in the room grew louder. I could feel all of their eyes slowly shifting to me, the murmurs dying down as they realized the connection. It was surreal, like time had slowed down, and suddenly I was no longer an invisible figure standing in the corner. My name was out there. My wealth, my work, everything I had kept under wraps was suddenly exposed. The shock was immediate. I could see Aunt Deborah's mouth drop open in disbelief, her eyes darting from the TV to me and back again. Greg's eyes narrowed in confusion. Rachel's face froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. I felt their eyes on me all at once, burning through the thin walls I'd built around my life. It felt like I couldn't breathe. I stayed still, frozen, watching them process the news like I was a stranger. They were piecing together the woman they thought was lost, the woman they thought had no direction, and now they were seeing her for what she really was. Wait, that's her? Emily's voice cracked the silence, her tone wavering between disbelief and shock. That's Olivia? Aunt Deborah finally spoke, her voice shaking a little. I didn't realize. I didn't know you were doing this, Olivia. I mean, why didn't you say anything? My mind raced. All I could think was how in the hell had it come to this? Why was I the one being exposed like this? It was supposed to be anonymous. That was the point. But now, here I was, the center of their judgment. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My stomach churned, and I could feel my skin getting hot under their stares. I had no idea, Rachel muttered, staring at me with a mix of awe and confusion. You've been doing all this quietly. I didn't answer right away. There was no point in getting into it, no point in explaining myself. The air felt thick, heavy with questions they weren't even sure how to ask. Olivia, Deborah said again, softer this time. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? You should have, I don't know, shared this with us. We could have been proud of you. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I didn't want you to be proud of me, I snapped, my voice sharp, the frustration I'd been holding back spilling out like a dam breaking. I didn't need your approval. I didn't want any of you to look at me like some kind of project to fix. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a split second, no one moved. No one spoke. Greg was the first to speak, his voice awkward. So you've been hiding all this from us? He asked, his eyes narrowing. Why? We're your family? Exactly, I said, trying to steady my breathing. You're my family, and you've never seen me for who I am, just who you wanted me to be. Emily opened her mouth to say something, probably some half-hearted apology, maybe more advice. But I held up my hand. I'm not going to explain myself, Emily. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't know what you all think of me. You don't know me. You never have. The room was dead quiet now, the reality of what I'd just said hanging in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. My family stared at me, their faces a mix of guilt and confusion. They didn't know what to do with me now that they saw what I was capable of, what I had built. I swallowed hard. It wasn't about your approval, it was about making a difference. That's what I've been doing. But the words felt empty now. They'd heard me, but had they really understood? Or would they just find a way to mold this new information into something they could accept? Either way, the damage had been done. There was no going back to the way things were, and part of me, though I hated it, wasn't sure I wanted to. The room felt like it was closing in around me, the weight of their questions pressing down on my shoulders. Everyone was talking at once, a jumble of voices, all scrambling to get answers they thought they were entitled to. How could you afford to do that? Emily asked, her tone sharp with disbelief. I mean, how did you make that kind of money? Aunt Deborah was nodding along, her eyes wide. Why didn't you tell us, Olivia? This is huge. We could have helped you celebrate this. Your success. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. My mind was racing, but I knew if I didn't get control of the conversation now, it would spiral out of my hands. They were all looking at me, waiting for an explanation they thought was owed to them. But they had no idea what it had taken to get here, what it felt like to be invisible for so long, even when you were succeeding. I've been running a marketing firm for years, I said quietly, steadying myself. A successful one. But I kept it private because I didn't want any of your judgment or unwanted opinions. Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. Judgment? Olivia, come on. We're your family. We just wanted to know. We were concerned. I shook my head. Concerned about what? That I'm not married? That I don't have a house like everyone else? I let the words hang in the air, sharp and biting. That's not concern. It's judgment, Aunt Deborah cut in, her voice too sweet, like she was trying to smooth over the tension. Olivia, sweetheart, we could have celebrated this with you. It's not about judgment. You could have shared your success with us. We could have been a part of it. She sounded so sincere, but I could hear the edge in her words. Celebrate? I echoed, incredulous. You think I kept all of this quiet because I wanted a party? You think I've been working my ass off all these years to get your approval? No, Deborah. I didn't want your praise. I wanted to make a difference. Quietly, I could feel the shift in the room as the words left my mouth. Aunt Deborah's face faltered, just for a second, and the others went silent. I didn't care anymore. I was done pretending. My whole business is built on helping other people succeed, I continued, my voice rising slightly. I've donated millions over the years, millions, to causes that actually matter, not for recognition, not for pats on the back. I've funded programs for kids, for women in tech, for people who are actually making a difference, without the fanfare. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. No one spoke, their faces a mix of guilt, surprise, and confusion. It was like the room had emptied of sound, leaving only the echo of my words hanging in the air. Wait, Greg finally muttered, his voice low. You've been giving away millions? And you didn't tell us? I nodded, feeling the weight of their stares. Yeah, I didn't tell anyone, because it wasn't about telling anyone. It was about doing what needed to be done without expecting anything in return. Emily, who had been so quick to judge earlier, was now speechless, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to find the right words. Aunt Deborah finally spoke, but her voice had lost some of its usual commanding tone. But why keep it a secret? We're your family. You could have... No, I cut her off. I didn't want to share it because you don't see me for who I am. You see what you want to see. And you know what? I've been so tired of living under the weight of your expectations. Deborah's face turned red. You're angry, she said, her voice soft, but I could hear the sting in her words. I thought you'd want to share this with us. We could have been proud of you. Proud of me? I snapped. What you're really saying is you wish I'd fit into your mold, that I'd done everything the way you think it's supposed to be done. But it was never about that. You don't get to claim my success as your own, Deborah. You don't get to be proud of me because you think it's convenient. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I could see it on their faces now, the realization that they had no idea who I really was. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand. But I wasn't going to wait for their approval anymore. I was done. Finally, Rachel spoke up, her voice quieter than before. So, you really don't need us, do you? You've done all of this on your own? I felt a bitter laugh bubble up, but I kept it inside. No, Rachel, I don't need you. I've never needed anyone's approval, and I certainly don't need to explain myself to any of you. There was a long pause. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken questions. But there was no more room for small talk. No more room for pretending. Are you done? I asked, my voice sharp. Because I've said everything I need to say. I didn't do this for you. I did it for the people who need it, the ones who never get recognized. Maybe you should start thinking about them too. No one responded. They didn't know how to. They were too stunned, too wrapped up in their own discomfort. But it didn't matter. I had said my piece. I was done playing their game. The room was still, heavy with the weight of what had just been said. I could feel the shift, the way their faces had gone from shock to something else. Guilt, embarrassment, realization. Emily was the first to break the silence, her voice quiet, almost too soft. Olivia, I didn't know. She looked at me, clearly trying to find the right words, but failing miserably. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like you had to hide what you've done. I didn't respond right away, just staring at her, feeling my irritation build. She didn't mean to. Of course she didn't, but it was too late for apologies now. I wasn't going to let her off that easily. That's the problem, I said, my voice clipped. You never thought to ask me about what I was doing. You assumed, you judged, and now you're sorry? I shook my head, the bitterness spilling out. Sorry doesn't change anything. Aunt Deborah, who had been quietly fidgeting with her drink, finally spoke up, her tone softer now. Olivia, I didn't realize. I thought you were just, struggling, trying to figure it out. I didn't know things were going this well. She trailed off, clearly unsure of how to fix the mess she'd made. I met her eyes, and for a moment, it almost looked like she felt something, guilt or maybe shame. But I didn't let that soften my response. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You only saw what you wanted to see. I'm not your charity project, Deborah. You never took the time to find out what was really going on. She opened her mouth, probably to offer some apology, but I cut her off. Don't pretend like you're suddenly concerned because I'm successful now. You've spent years telling me I'm not doing enough, or that I'm not enough. Now that you see the truth, it's a little late for apologies. The silence stretched out again, thick and awkward. I could see that some of them were genuinely processing what I had just said. But Emily, as always, looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to fix everything but didn't know how. Greg spoke next, though his words were hesitant. I guess we've all assumed a lot about you, Olivia. We didn't understand what you were doing, and He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I feel like an idiot now. The sincerity in his voice cut through the tension, but I wasn't sure how to take it. I wanted to believe it, to think that they'd learned something. But the truth was, I'd spent too many years listening to their judgments and unsolicited advice to trust them now. I looked around the room at my family, people I was supposed to feel connected to, people who had always seen me as something I wasn't, a failure, someone who needed help, someone who wasn't enough. You don't get it, I said quietly, my voice low but firm. None of you really understood me. You never have. For years, you've treated me like I'm some kind of lost cause. You've given me your advice, told me what I should do, what would make me successful, but you didn't know anything about the choices I was making. You didn't see what I was doing behind the scenes. You never asked. I let those words sink in before continuing. I'm tired of being talked down to. I'm tired of being the one who gets lectured because I don't fit your mold. You've all made assumptions about me. Based on what? What you thought was true, but the truth is, you didn't know anything, and I'm not going to keep pretending that your opinions matter. The last of the air in the room seemed to drain out as I finished. I didn't feel relief, not exactly. But there was something in me that felt like I'd finally broken free from something that had been holding me down for a long time. They all stared at me, wide-eyed, a mix of emotions flickering across their faces. Some were embarrassed, others were uncomfortable, and a few looked like they were starting to get it, finally. But even as the realization set in, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. There was no magic moment of reconciliation, no real apology, no deep transformative change. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the room one last time. I'm done here, I said, my voice even. Done trying to explain myself. Done trying to fit into your version of what my life should look like. For a moment, no one moved. But then, Aunt Deborah, her expression caught somewhere between regret and frustration, finally spoke up again, quieter this time. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied, my tone softer now, but still firm. But I think you've all heard enough. I've made my point. I could feel my anger draining away, leaving something else in its place. Exhaustion, maybe. I didn't have it in me to keep fighting, not anymore. I'd said everything I needed to say. Now it was their turn to figure out what they wanted to do with it. The weeks that followed the reunion felt like I was stepping into a different world. A world where my family, for the first time in years, was actually trying to understand me. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or just a shift in perspective caused by the shock of what had come to light. But either way, I was noticing changes. Little ones, but enough to make me pause and think. The first message came from Emily. It was a text, short and to the point. Olivia, I'm really sorry for how I treated you. I should have recognized your success sooner. I feel ashamed I didn't. I stared at the message for a while before typing a reply. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, to keep the distance between us, but something in me wanted to acknowledge it, if only to make sure she understood the gravity of what she'd said. It's fine. Thanks for saying that. But you don't have to apologize. You didn't know. Just don't make assumptions about me again. She texted back almost immediately. I won't. I really get it now. I feel like an idiot for not seeing it before. I didn't reply right away, but I couldn't help the faint sense of satisfaction that spread through me. Maybe she'd learned something from all of this. I wasn't expecting her to change overnight, but at least she was seeing things a little clearer. A few days later, Aunt Deborah called. My stomach tightened when I saw her name on the screen. I didn't pick up at first, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't sure what kind of conversation I was walking into. I had already said my piece, and part of me still wasn't sure how I felt about all of it. She left a voicemail. Olivia, I know things got heated when we talked, and I understand if you're still upset. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said. You were right. I didn't understand. I want to do something meaningful, something that's actually going to help. I was hoping you could help me figure out where to start. I'm ready to be more involved in the community. Call me back when you get a chance. I felt the urge to ignore her call, maybe out of some lingering bitterness, but I knew I needed to respond. The old me would have shut her out entirely, but I wasn't that person anymore. I'd laid it all out there, and now she was asking for help. I had to decide if I was willing to offer it. I called her back later that evening. Hi, Deborah, I said when she picked up. I got your message. Her voice came through, tentative at first. Olivia, I really do want to make a change. I want to help in a real way, and I think you can guide me. You've obviously been doing a lot, and I want to do something like that. Not just, the surface level stuff we've always done. I paused for a second, taking it all in. Her words were soft but sincere, and I wasn't sure if she truly understood what this was going to involve. It wasn't about doing something for the sake of looking good, it was about committing to the work. Well, I started, trying to keep my voice measured. It's not as easy as just signing up for a volunteer shift. You have to be genuinely involved. There are programs that need long-term support, but I can help you figure out where to start. It's not just about writing checks or making appearances, it's about making an actual impact. She didn't interrupt, she just listened, and when I finished, she said, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Olivia. Just tell me how to start. That was a step I hadn't expected, and I had to admit, it felt good. Okay, we can start small. I'll send you some information on organizations in your area that need more than just funding. They need people to roll up their sleeves and get involved. The call ended with Deborah thanking me repeatedly, and for the first time, I felt like she wasn't just trying to appease me. She was trying to change, and that was something. A couple of weeks after that, Uncle Mark called. Hey, Liv, he said, sounding more casual than I expected. I've been thinking about your business, and I could really use your help. I've got this small company, and we've been struggling to get the word out. I could use some advice on marketing, real marketing, not just throwing money at ads. You know what you're doing. Would you be willing to help? I raised an eyebrow, but I could feel the shift in his tone. He wasn't just asking because he had to, he was genuinely asking for my expertise. It was a far cry from the dismissive, why don't you get a real job? Comments I'd heard over the years. I can help, I said, my voice steady. We can start by looking at your brand and finding ways to actually connect with your customers. But you have to be ready to put in the work. I don't just hand out solutions. He laughed, a nervous but appreciative chuckle. I'm ready. I know I've been stubborn in the past, Liv, but I'm asking now. I agreed to meet with him, and as the conversation ended, I felt a strange mix of relief and wariness. They were finally starting to see me differently, but it didn't mean I was going to lower my guard. My boundaries were still intact. I wasn't going to let them erase the progress I'd made just because they were trying to be nice. As the days passed, I noticed it in the little things. The way they didn't make the usual comments about my lack of a traditional career path, the way they were more careful with their words, less quick to judge, more open to listening. It wasn't perfect. It was still a work in progress. But there was a shift. They were beginning to respect me, not just for what I'd done, but for who I was, and that, more than anything, felt like real progress. 6 months later, I stood at the entrance of the community center, watching as the grand opening unfolded in front of me. The event was everything I'd hoped for, well-organized, filled with excitement and energy. There were kids milling around, tech demonstrations set up, and volunteers eager to get started. The program I'd funded was finally launched, and it was everything I'd imagined, a real, tangible impact. And yet, there was something strange about being here with my family. They were all here too. Aunt Deborah, Emily, Greg, even Uncle Mark. Everyone had shown up. They were all walking around talking to people, mingling with the other donors. They didn't just show up because it was a family thing. They were genuinely interested, genuinely proud. I had to admit, it felt good. Better than I'd thought it would. Deborah approached me with a glass of champagne in hand. Her expression was different now, not that air of condescension she used to wear, but something closer to admiration. She offered me the glass, and I took it without thinking. To you, she said, her voice soft but clear, drawing a few eyes around us. For making all of this possible, you've done more than just give money. You've changed lives, and I'm proud of you. There was a moment of silence before the rest of the family raised their glasses in agreement. It wasn't the same as before. There was no pity in their eyes, no desire to fit me into some box of their expectations. They saw me for who I was now, and that was all that mattered. I tried to smile, but the truth was, I felt a strange mix of discomfort and satisfaction. I wasn't used to being the center of attention like this. For so long, I kept everything quiet, hoping for a sense of anonymity. But now, there I was, in the spotlight. It wasn't about recognition. It never had been. But I couldn't deny the weight of their approval. It was different than I'd imagined, but in a way, it felt good. As I looked around, I realized how much had changed in the last 6 months. My family had come around, not just to the idea of who I was, but to the truth of what I'd been doing all along. They'd stopped judging me, stopped trying to fix me. They'd learned to appreciate my contributions without trying to overshadow them. It was a relief. It was everything I'd wanted and more. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder how much of this was just a byproduct of the truth coming out. If I hadn't been forced into the open, would they have ever really understood? The conversation shifted to the program, and Deborah started talking about how she'd gotten involved with some local charities. I listened, nodding along, but part of me felt like an outsider in this new dynamic. Sure, they were trying, but this new respect felt fragile, like it could break if I weren't careful. I had to remind myself that this was progress, real progress. They weren't seeing me as a failure anymore. They were seeing me as someone who was making a difference. And for once, I didn't feel the need to hide that. As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something bigger, something that had been brewing for a long time. I wasn't sure where it would take me, but it didn't matter. I had already made my mark. I had already changed things, not just for myself, but for the people who mattered most. And in the end, maybe that was all the recognition I'd ever needed.